Okay, and we're live. And today I wanted to look at Surah 89, which is entitled The Daybreak or The Dawn. It's in the Arabic, it's Al Fahir. And Fahir is also the morning prayer. It's mentioned in Surah 24, and it's the first of 5 daily prayers for Muslims. And it begins the obligatory fasting in Ramadan. I think it's called the Saum. But that's the name of the surah, and the theme of the surah is basically Muhammad reprimanding the Quraysh for not following him and not obeying him and not following Allah. So it begins with Allah again swearing, I swear by the daybreak and the 10 nights. And this is a reference to the 12th and final month of the Islamic calendar. And I was reading about this yesterday, and it kind of exemplifies the circular logic of Islam, these debates about why Muhammad said the 10 nights and not the 10 days. And the conclusion of these Muslim scholars was basically it's the night is the same as the day, so that's why he said. But again, there were even more incoherent parts of the surah which we'll get to, but it starts by Allah swearing by the daybreak. Hi, love and light. Yeah, it's going pretty well. I swear by the daybreak and the 10 nights and the even and the odd and the night when it departs. Truly, in that there is an oath for those who possess understanding. And this is important because Muhammad was very keen on making oaths and swearing, despite the fact this is something that God tells you not to do repeatedly in both the New and the Old Testament. He tells you not to make vain oaths, and Jesus affirms this and says you shouldn't make any oaths. You shouldn't even swear by the hair on your head. And basically, everything Muhammad swears by is something that is forbidden or enjoined against in the Bible. And you can tell that Muhammad didn't have a good understanding of the Bible because the Quran is littered with passages like this where he's swearing, where it's either Muhammad swearing or in this case it's Allah swearing, which makes even less sense. Allah is swearing by things that he created. It doesn't it's mind-boggling that there are Muslims who can actually read the Quran and believe that this was created by God. Yeah, they always swear on the Quran. And again, even putting aside the religious context of this, if you meet someone who is always swearing that they're telling the truth or I swear, it's usually an indication that they're not very trustworthy to begin with. I mean, this is one of the things that really gives away a person's motives when they're always swearing or affirming that they're telling the truth. If someone's honest and has a a trustworthy reputation, they're not going to need to perpetually convince you that they're not lying. And this is something that's a recurring theme throughout the Quran. Yeah, it's a sign of taqiyya. And it just goes further when you go along in this surah. In verse 6, it says, have you not considered how the Lord dealt with Ad, the people of Aram, possessors of lofty buildings, the like of which were not created in the other cities, and with Thamud, who hewed out the rocks in the valley, and with Pharaoh, i.e. Pharaoh, and the Lord of hosts. Now, there's a whole bunch of interesting aspects of this. Hi, Miss Bluebird. which deserve individual attention. But I'm not going to spend that much time on this. But just to pick them off one by one, he says the people of Aram. Now, this is one of the areas where the Quran, it's not helpful to look at Islamic tradition. And I said about a quarter of the Quran is indecipherable, even when you look at the Hadith. And this is one of those cases because we don't know by Aram, we're not sure what Muhammad is referring to. It could be a lost city. It could be part of Islamic folklore. It could also be a city mentioned in the Bible that corresponds to modern Aleppo. It could be any number of things. But he also says here possessors of lofty buildings. Now, he could be referring to the Hadramat, who are a people in what is now Yemen, but back then was Southern Arabia. These are people, the most, the Hadramat are famous, aside from um, giving birth to the Bin Laden family. The Hadramat are famous for building these amazing pre-modern skyscrapers in the middle of the desert in sand. So you have these buildings that are 20 feet or 20 stories in the middle of the desert. And it's really remarkable in terms of being an architectural feat. You have these giant buildings. So he could be referring to the Hadramat because he also follows that with the Samud. And the Thamud were a group. He follows it with the Thamud. So this was a tribe in the Hijaz where Muhammad was, where you find Mecca. But he also mentions the Ad, and the Ad were people that lived in the region where the Hadrama were. So these were people that would live in southern Arabia, but he mentions them together as if they're they correspond. So basically, the people, the tribes that lived in the Hijaz and the tribes that lived in southern Arabia, he usually combines them. So whenever you see in the Quran mention of Ad and Samud, they're always almost always combined. Usually in some sort of warning to people. Muhammad claiming that these tribes were destroyed or brought low because they didn't follow Allah. So they're always combined as if they're one tribe, even though they come from completely different parts of Arabia. But he could be referring when he's talking about the Aram, he could be referring to them, that this tribe in southern Arabia where the Bin Ladens come from. They came from Yemen and moved to Saudi Arabia, and Mohammed bin Laden, Osama's father, became a huge. Um, the Saudi royal family became his patron, so he constructed most of what you see in Mecca today. All of the buildings, um, all of the buildings around where you see people going on the pilgrimage, the Hajj in Mecca, around the mosques, the grand mosques, all of these things. In fact, he was so good at building when a group of Sunni jihadists took over Mecca and they besieged Mecca in the 1970s. One of them who claimed he was the Mahdi, that they used French special forces to come in and take them out, and they shot tow missiles at the minarets, and the minarets still stood. They killed the hostage takers inside of them, the the people belonging to this group, but the minarets were still standing because they were constructed so well by the Bin Ladens. But that's just an aside. But he could to say that he could be referring to this group, the Hadramat, or he could be referring to a lost city. But the thing is, you don't know what he's referring to when he says the people of Aram. And this is one of the things. There are passages in the Bible which uh, need to be elucidated. You need guidance sometimes to understand them. But the Quran has chunks, uh, 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 entire chunks of the Quran which are just completely indecipherable. Even if you go to the Hadith or the Tafsirs and try to understand them, you'll end up just as confused as you were when you started reading it. And that's the problem with claiming that the Quran is created by God. Why would God create a book which is indecipherable, where there are huge parts that make absolutely no sense, even with further attempts at clarification? It doesn't make any sense. So that's one of the problems. And in verse 10, it says, "And with Pharaoh, the Lord of hosts." And here's another problem. He refers to Pharaoh as the Lord of hosts. So he talks about the the people of Aram, whoever they are. He talks about the Samud who hewed out the rocks in the valley, and then he talks about Pharaoh, comma, the Lord of hosts. Why is he referring to Pharaoh with a title as the Lord of hosts? The Lord of hosts is something, if you are familiar with the Bible, it refers to God, and the hosts are the hosts of heaven. And in the Bible, you're told, the people of Israel are told not to worship the hosts, not to, and it's something that comes up over 260 times in the Old and New Testament, uh, all the way from Judges, and before, all the way, from there, all through Revelation, the final book of the Bible. And um, the it, it, it's something that's repeated a lot. The Lord of hosts, and it's referring to God, because he's the Lord of everything, including everything that's in heaven. So why is Pharaoh described as the Lord of hosts? That's a interesting question. uh who committed inordinancy in the cities, and this is a reference to, in the Islamic version of what happened in the book of Exodus. And the the narrative of the Quran doesn't really correspond to the Bible. If you look at the interaction between Pharaoh and Moses and Aaron, there are some similarities. There's some basic points of agreement, but it is completely different. I mean, the fact that he transposes part of the book of Esther into the book of Exodus and has Haman working for Pharaoh is just an indication that Muhammad did not know what he was. He did not he didn't know anything really about the Bible, the narrative structure or the order. He just took these things and kind of combined them all together like a gumbo, like a theological gumbo, and it doesn't really make sense when you understand the Bible, when you have something to compare it to, which most Muslims don't, because they don't actually go and read the Bible and look at the source material, what Muhammad was working with, and therefore they can't understand how far he departed from that material. So, um, he refers to the Pharaoh as the Lord of hosts, who committed inordinancy in the cities, so they made great mischief therein. Therefore your Lord let down upon them a portion of the chastisement. Most surely your Lord is watching. And as for man, when his Lord tries him, then treats him with honor and makes him lead an easy life, he says, "My Lord honors me." But when he tries him differently, then straightens to him his means of subsistence, he says, "My Lord has disgraced me." Nay, but you do not honor the orphan, nor do you urge one another to feed the poor, and you eat away the heritage, devouring everything indiscriminately. The interesting thing here is that Muhammad was a literal orphan. his mother and father. His mother abandoned him, then brought him back, but she ultimately died. His father died. He was raised. Uh, he was raised by another relative who cared for him, but that relative died. So he was basically, to all intents and purposes, he was an orphan. And you see this reflected in in the Islamic understanding of adoption. The fact that adoption is something that's forbidden. Um, it's why, and this is one reason Muslims would benefit from reading the book of Galatians, because particularly book chapter 4, because it demonstrates what adoption is. God adopting sons and daughters into his family and becoming their father. And the idea of God as a father is something that's completely alien to Islam. And one of the reasons is because it was an alien concept to Muhammad. He didn't have a real father. David Wood did a series of videos where he performs psychoanalysis on Muhammad and tries to analyze him from a psychological perspective. And one of the things you notice is that the rules and the nature of God and the nature of God's relationship to man was shaped in large part by Muhammad's own history and his own life, his own family. And this is one of those things that he stamped on, on Islam. This idea of there not being an adoption, not God not having the relationship to his creation as a father to his sons and daughters, his children. The whole idea of God being a father is a foreign concept in Islam, and this is one of the reasons. So I just wanted to bring that up. So in 20 it says, and you love wealth with exceeding love. And again, this is ironic coming from a person who created an entire surah describing how you should give him 1/5 of all war booty. But that's an aside. So in 21 it says, nay, when the earth is made to crumble to pieces and your Lord comes, and also the angels in ranks, and hell is made to appear on that day. On that day shall man be mindful. And what shall being mindful then avail him? He shall say, oh, would that I had sent before for this my life. But on that day shall no one chastise with anything like his chastisement, and no one shall bind with anything like his binding. So this is also a recurring theme in the Quran, the idea that Allah is the best and the greatest. Again, he's providing no real substantive evidence to prove this. It's just something he repeats, kind of like tautology, just over and over again. You keep hearing this in the Quran, this theme of Allah being the best, the greatest of this, the best of that. He's even the greatest of deceivers, even though the word used in my copy is planner. The actual translation is deceiver. So Allah is the best, even when it comes to lying to and misleading people. 27, oh, so that art at rest. Return to your Lord, well pleased with him, well pleasing him. And again, it's ironic because there is no real rest in Islam. The idea of eternal security is absent entirely. So the idea of resting in God, the rest you find in Christ, is something that's completely absent from Islam. So in 29 it says, so enter my servants and enter into my garden. And the whole idea of servitude and and the whole idea of servitude is intrinsic to Islam. There is service, you could say slavery, but there's no relationship. There's no relational aspect to um, this. There's no connection between man and God. He's simply a slave toiling in perpetually, and hopefully he'll be rewarded with paradise, but even that is contingent. There's no real guarantee. Okay, so that was Surah 89. there are there are about two longer surahs left, but all the others again are just like 7, 8, 11, 7, 8, 9 verses long, and there's only about 12 pages left. 12 pages and 24 surahs. So hopefully we'll be wrapping this up shortly. But thanks everyone for joining. And like I said, be sure to share these videos. See you next time.